the Property Pod. Welcome to the Property Pod with Moneyweb. The property sector is an ever-changing sector. And in this podcast series, your host, Suren Naidu, chats to movers and shakers in the property industry.
Hello and welcome to the Property Pod, South Africa's leading property investor podcast right here on Moneyweb. It is Youth Month in our country and we have a youth-focused podcast and guest on this week's show. And for those of you who missed last week's episode, not to worry, we actually didn't publish because of the Youth Day public holiday. But our guest this week is Sipho Mbadaliga, the chair of the Youth in Property Association, or YIPA as it is more commonly known. The organization is around a decade old and we last spoke to its former chair way back in 21, I think, and his name was Monedi Lefekani, who's actually immigrated now. I think he's based out of the US. Now, Sipho has been at the helm for a little while, or a few years, but we'll get more insights from him now. He shares some insights on the organization and what it has been up to, especially in the youth space, considering it's targeting the youth in property, as it were. Sipho, welcome to the Property Pod.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
So, I don't know if it's an unfair question, but cheeky question. How young is Sipho and how long have you been chair of the Youth in Property Association? What's your background?
So, Sipho, in a nutshell, is turning 31 years young on the 26th of June, which is this Friday. So I still have 4 more years to go as youth. And I've been involved with YIPA for quite a few years. So I became chairperson of YIPA last year, February, which is 2025. So just over a year and a half. But before that, I served as the financial director. I think it was since 2021. So I've been with the organization for about 5 years. And yeah, so I've been serving in the organization and it's been good ever since.
Okay, it's good to hear, in some political organizations, you have youth that are over 40 years old heading the organization. But jokes aside, you are a bean counter as far as I know. You have a history in auditing or studying accounting. Can you share a little bit of your background from that perspective and how you got involved in the property industry through YIPA, as it were?
Yeah, so I actually chose the other route, which is not bean counter. So in accounting, you can either go the auditing route or training outside of public practice. So basically, what I chose to do was to do my articles through a bank. And so the only auditing in practice that I got exposure to was actually internal auditing. In terms of from a property perspective, the way I got into property through being a CA was I did my articles at a bank and I actually realized that I have a passion for property. I think this passion sparked at around 2019, which is my first year of articles. That's when I started investing in property from a personal perspective. And then throughout my journey at work in my articles, I then came across the fact that I can have an opportunity to rotate within the real estate finance team within the bank. And that's when I actually chose it as one of my rotations. So I then had a rotation in the real estate finance team within investment banking. And that's when I actually really, really, really fell in love with property. And so from there on, I have been involved in YIPA. So the way the YIPA conversation started is one of the people that were involved in the organization approached me for the financial director position. I think it was during a time when YIPA was actually going through a lot of transition. I was then approached for the financial director position, given my passion for property and the fact that I am a qualified chartered accountant. It was a no-brainer. So then I took on the opportunity of being the financial director and then served as a financial director for a couple of years. And then I am now effectively the chairperson of the organization.
Thanks for that background. Sipo, are you still with Standard Bank? You didn't mention the name of the bank, but I did
Yes.
see online that it was
Yes.
started at Standard Bank, and obviously Standard Bank is one of the biggest financial banks in
Mhm.
South Africa, but it also has a sizable property portfolio. I know when I spoke to Monedi a few years ago, he mentioned Liberty 2 Degrees, which is no longer listed. But we won't go into the history.
Yeah.
Since February last year, obviously your time at YIPA has been longer than that, but you've been
Yeah.
chairperson since February. What are some of the initiatives that YIPA has been doing? Can you share some highlights about the
Mhm.
organization, in promoting youth in property, but also how big is the organization now?
Yeah, so the organization has grown quite significantly. I think we are just at about 3,000 members nationally. So we've been growing quite significantly, and you know, there's been a lot of initiatives that we've basically been able to organize. So one of them is actually one of the recent events we had, which was an urban regeneration event that we had with quite a few big corporates and big government institutions within Johannesburg. So basically, if you look at the CBD has been going through what we call urban decay
Hmm.
for quite a few years now. But that also presents opportunities for people, and more especially even young people, to actually invest in the CBD. So what some of these companies are doing is they're actually disposing of some of those properties. Maybe, for example, they get an hijacked property, they go through a legal process to take back the property, and then from there on dispose of that property. And we've actually been lobbying for youth, in particular, to be involved in those type of transactions, to be involved in purchasing those type of buildings, and basically transforming or regenerating the inner cities and the CBDs as well. So those are some of the initiatives and as well. But another initiative that I can mention is basically a job shadow program that we've been running over the years. So this is where we get a group of learners from high schools, and then they're able to then go into big corporates and basically shadow. So it's a program of about 3 days. They're basically able to shadow. This is what an architect does. This is what a quantity surveyor does. This is what a structural engineer does. And if you actually see or actually observe, a lot of young black people don't have exposure to these type of careers. I mean,
Hmm.
when we grew up knowing that you can become a doctor, you can become a lawyer, you can become an accountant, but you don't actually realize that there's a lot of opportunities actually in the property sector in
Hmm.
particular, where you can become a QS, an architect. So a lot of those opportunities you only get exposure to through your peers in university when you've already registered for the course that you want to do. But there's a lot of opportunities, and I think these opportunities should be opened to black youth in particular, because the property sector is quite still untransformed
Hmm.
to date.
Okay. We'll get to transformation in a sec. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Can Joburg be saved? You represent an organization that
Mm,
represents the youth, and, it's good to hear that they are looking at, as YIPA, you are looking at, pushing the agenda of urban renewal, as it were. And a lot of
yeah.
youth stay in our CBDs, so it makes sense from that perspective. What are your thoughts on particularly Joburg, because they seem to have the biggest challenge in terms of dealing with urban regeneration, and obviously it's quite a complex issue. We know
Yeah.
xenophobia has raised its ugly head
Mm.
in recent months.
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer that Joburg can be saved. I do think that the biggest obstacle right now is channeling the funds where they actually need to go. I do think the funds are definitely there, but I think we have a mixture of problems within not just Joburg, but within the country. But obviously, there are other cities where things are run much better. But I think from a Joburg perspective, I think it's an issue of there's a lot of corruption that has been happening in the country over the past, I don't know how many decades. And I think those things, coupled with the fact that you're not maintaining you're not maintaining your infrastructure, you're just letting the city go. It has placed us in a big challenge because I think if I just give this example of let's say mowing your lawn, for example, if you mow your lawn every single week, it'll be easier for you to from a costing perspective, not to spend a lot of money getting like a tree feller while when the lawn is now like a bush or something like that because you've been mowing it regularly. And I can actually pinpoint that to the city. I think what has happened to the city is you've had the occasional burst pipe, you've let it go. Now it's been about 5 years and that pipe is still burst. Obviously, the depth of the burst is now bigger because you've just let it go. So I think the problems in Joburg have just escalated because of things that are not attended to when they should have been attended to. And that's your corruption issue, where the money is there, but it's not being channeled to where it needs to go. So I genuinely believe that if private sector can, which is happening now, partner with the government to say that let us transform Joburg, let us regenerate Joburg, I sincerely believe that it can be done, it can be restored.
Well, Busi Mavuso expressed it in a second column within a month about the whole Joburg financial crisis issue. So you're not the first to highlight this. And it also ties in with the whole broken window theory, fixing it as soon as possible to avoid further decay. Sipho, just from an empowerment side, what is... I know you talked about skills and, highlighting to the youth the opportunities in the property sector. But it is Youth Month in South Africa. We have a huge youth unemployment crisis. Clearly, you are evangelist of sort in terms of the opportunity in the property sector. But, what can be done from a transformation perspective? What are your views around getting more youth in the property sector? You highlighted a bit, but it can even go down in terms of property services, ownership. There's a whole host of different areas that the youth can be involved with. And sometimes, even if you have another career, you also can invest in property. And you talked about investing from a young age in property. So that's quite a positive thing.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing we need to understand is that, there's a lot of pillars within property. So it's not just property development. So that's just one of the pillars. So there's property development, there's property finance, there's property management, there's property marketing, there's property law. So I think a lot of the people are getting so fixated on property development and property investment, which is probably the sexier pillar because that's where the ownership lies. But I think even from a transformation perspective for young people, especially, I think we need to actually even start thinking about property management, for example. So if I just maybe define property management, it will just be like facilities management, where a lot of artisans can actually also get involved in this. And I also stress the point of artisans because I think growing up, we don't actually want to become, or it's not sold as a sexy career, being an artisan, being a plumber, being an electrician, whatever it is. But I think actually there's a lot of opportunities in those sectors. And if you just look at the number of people that are actually dominating those sectors, it is foreign nationals because they've come into that sector and they've realized that there's a lot of opportunities. And as South Africans, we're not taking the time to actually get our trade certificates and whatever it takes to get into those sectors as well. And there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of scarce skills in these sectors, being it plumbing, being it electricity, whatever it is. So we need to actually look at property management, but also there's also property finance as well, which is the sector I'm in. So I'm in the property sector from a property finance perspective as well. And it is my involvement, and there's a lot of opportunities there as well. And I mean, if you're not just talking banks as here, you're also talking bond originators as well. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And then also look at property marketing. You can become an estate agent as well. So a lot of youth are actually not thinking about all the layers of property and the entire value chain. So, and then you also have property law from a conveyancing perspective. So I do think that the property sector actually presents a lot of opportunities, but I think the people are actually just fixating on property development and property investment because that's where the ownership really lies. But I think there's a lot more sectors where you can actually get involved, actually get to understand the asset class, and then you can get into the ownership perspective.
Sipho, just to conclude, I know you said you have been chair of YIPA since February last year, so it hasn't been a long time. You have been there in your financial responsibilities prior to that. But, if you had to leave YIPA, what would your legacy be? And, do you want to share any other aspects of the organization that maybe future plans or any other highlights or, key programs where, perhaps even appeal to a private sector listed property funds to back you more? I know your former chair mentioned Liberty 2 Degrees, which is not listed anymore, but there have been other partners that have backed YIPA over the years.
Absolutely. So I think what the legacy I'd want to leave within the organization is I want YIPA to actually, and I've said it like just now in the other question, we need to capture the entire value chain. I think there's a lot of people that are not being captured within the property sector. And I think if we are able to just focus our attention on the entire property value chain, property development, property investment, property finance, property law, property marketing, etc., we're able to capture the entire value chain. And I think that's where even the corporates can get involved, because we need a bigger link between the YIPA, your TVET colleges and corporates, because that's where the majority of people within the property sector are, TVET colleges. And I sincerely believe that we can actually be able to get a lot of people within from an unemployment perspective to get them employed. There's a lot of learnerships that you can get them exposed to. There's a lot of internships, a lot of opportunities that these young people can get exposure to. So I think the biggest link that I want YIPA to have with the South Africa and corporates is capturing the entire value chain, which I think it's something that we've sort of missed over the years because we've sort of focused more on the property development and property investment perspective.
Okay. Sipho, we will have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time. That was Sipho Madaliga, the chair of the Youth in Property Association, or YIPA.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Property Pod with Suren Naidu. To listen to more episodes, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates. Follow Suren on Twitter @Suren Naidu for more of his property industry content and other business stories.